Speaking to us today is UW Madison professor Joshua Calhoun. He is an assistant professor of English at UW Madison and specializes in Shakespeare, 16th and 17th century poetry, and the history of media. In his teaching and research, he gets to explore three things he loves, which are Shakespeare, old books, and nature. He is currently writing a book titled The Nature of the Page, Ecology, Poetry, and Papermaking in Renaissance England. Joshua is also on the board of directors for the Friends of the Library. Professor Calhoun will be taking us on the topic of the First Folio exhibit at the Chazen Museum and how it compares to the other incredibly rare books on the UW Madison campus. We look forward to your presentation, Professor Calhoun, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way of saying thank you. As we welcome Professor Calhoun to the podium, just a reminder that we will save hopefully some room for questions and that there'll be a microphone going amongst the crowd to ask those questions. So please welcome Joshua.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I know I must be a disappointment after J.J. Watt, and I'm sorry.
No, you've got
it. It really is an honor to be here with you today. I want to say thank you to a few people, to Ed Van Gimmert from the University Libraries for all the support that he's given, especially to this First Folio exhibit here in Madison, but also to all the programs that are happening around this exhibit, which is part of what I will talk to you about today. That's part of, or a big part of what's so exciting about the First Folio. And I also want to thank Susan Baraboo, who put in the grant and who's done so much work on this. I also, I'll talk about some other programs, some other people I'm grateful for, but I thought I'd start, I was told I was at the Friends of the Library Board meeting just a week ago, and I'm sorry, Mary, I'm going to do it. Mary Rouse came over. She said, let me talk to you for a second. You're going to speak to the Rotary Club. And they say 30 minutes, but you need to do 20 minutes and 10 minutes for questions. And then she said, but you're an adult. Do whatever you want. And I said, Mary, I'm going to do what you just told me. So now I have 19 minutes. I want to talk to you about what's so exciting about having Shakespeare's First Folio here on exhibit in Madison at the Chazen Museum. What I want to do today, though, is spend a little time talking about why the folio itself is so exciting, and also some time talking about the exciting things happening beyond the walls of the Chazen and beyond the borders of the campus as it relates to the First Folio. So these questions of, what are we gaining by having a First Folio here? What sort of conversations and collaborations are going on? How's it helping our campus and our community think more about technology, about communication, about legacy, about the arts? So I'll tell you a little bit about the First Folio, and then I'll tell you about the work that went into applying. Then I'll tell you how all the work that went into applying for the grants and scheduling events and building events around the First Folio in Madison has succeeded. Or to put it maybe in language that speaks to members of a Rotary Club, I'll tell you what we invested in, namely bringing a book to Madison, and then I'll talk about the return on the investment in terms of impact in the state of Wisconsin. But first, just a quick review for those of you who were not with the 40 Rotarians who went to see the First Folio. How many of you have gone over to see the First Folio? I know some of you went over as a group last week. Great. So this means I'm talking to people who obviously are excited and chomping at the bit to get over there. Hopefully you will get a chance to go see the exhibit and maybe some things around it. The folio, here we have the folio title page, right? This is an iconic image. It's not a particularly good work of art in terms of an engraving. It's actually has been referred to as one of the worst portraits of the 17th century in engraving. But it's the iconic one. It's the one we know. And it's the title page to the First Folio. And I want to tell you just a little bit about what this book is. Why is it special? So it's a large format book, first of all. When we say folio, we're talking about a size of book. Folio means it's folded. It's a large sheet of paper, a handmade paper folded once. So if you want to get a sense of how large this piece of paper that's folded once is, as soon as I'm done talking to you, I have to race off to the airport and fly to Delaware to give a talk. I have my suitcase, and that's TSA approved because I will not have time to check a bag. And if I took that TSA approved suitcase and I took a piece of paper, a handmade piece of paper, and I could just fit it right down inside that TSA approved size suitcase. It's a large sheet of paper. You fold that in half once, and then you have four leaves, four sides, and that's what the First Folio is made out of. A lot of those sheets sewn together. It's a large format. It's an expensive book. It cost £1, which doesn't sound like very much, but by today's standards, maybe $250, $200 to $250. I think that's a little deceptive, though, because it also depends on how much you make. Some skilled laborers made £4 in a year. So this was not a book that the average person was buying. It's the first collection of all of Shakespeare's plays into one volume. But interestingly, it's also the first collection of plays into a folio-sized volume in Renaissance England. In other words, what they printed in that size, in this large format size, did not tend to be plays. It tended to be things like theological treatises, Bibles, sometimes medical treatises, usually books that were, a lot of the books in folio size were printed in Latin, and were different kinds of books. So this is it represents a turn in the way that we think about and value plays in this period. Ben Jonson's folio was printed. He printed a folio of some of his plays in 1616, but it had other things mixed in, some treatises and so forth. This is the first printing of just plays. It's about 900 pages. It weighs about 4 pounds. And if you, my basketball coach in high school always had a Louis L'Amour novel, like a little paperback. If you put two of those side by side and two on top of each other, that's about the size of it. Somehow I like to think about the size of this expensive book alongside Louis L'Amour books. And one reason for that is because it's actually a gathering of a lot of other little books like that. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. It's called, the exhibit is called, The Book That Gave Us Shakespeare. So why? Why did this book give us Shakespeare? And that has to do with these other little books that I was telling you about. This is the catalog. This is what we consider the table of contents for the First Folio. And you can see there there are 35 plays listed here. There are actually 36 in here. They missed one. But there are 35 plays listed, 36 plays altogether in this volume. Now, half of these 36 plays had been printed in a smaller format, a very small, what's called a quarto. That's, you take one sheet of paper and you fold it twice. Not the same quality of paper, by the way, a much lower grade of paper, much cheaper. This is the sort of thing that somebody could buy. If you could afford to go to the theater, you could probably afford to buy a quarto and read it. You may not be able to have a big collection, but you might be able to buy a quarto and read it. Half of those were printed. Half of them were not printed prior to 1623. Would they have been printed after 1623? We don't know for sure. What we do know is it's quite likely that if these other 18 plays had not been printed in the First Folio, we wouldn't have them. And you would miss some of them. Even if you don't love Shakespeare with the passion that I do, you would miss some of these plays. Let me give you an example. Here I've just put it all together. Everything in blue, those are all the plays that we would not have without this First Folio. The Tempest, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Measure for Measure, Comedy of Errors, As You Like It, The Taming of the Shrew, All's Well That Ends Well, Twelfth Night, The Winter's Tale. Over on the tragedy side, we wouldn't have Coriolanus or Timon of Athens, but we also wouldn't have Julius Caesar or Macbeth. We wouldn't have Antony and Cleopatra or Cymbeline. The histories get actually, it's interesting, the histories would have fared the best. And in some ways, I don't, if you've read King John, I'm not sure that's a huge loss. What we wouldn't have is the chorus from Henry V. We do have Henry V, but it was printed before, but not the chorus. Oh, for a muse of fire. So there are parts of this that aren't printed as well. So the history plays, interestingly, there's a tradition of comedy and tragedy as your two main genres. The history play is a new kind of genre that's really being developed and invented here in this period in Elizabethan England. And actually, it's the more popular of them, and so there's been printed more. Henry IV, Part 1 was Shakespeare's most popular play in print during his lifetime. Printed more than Hamlet, printed more than any other play. Henry IV, Part 1. Falstaff had a lot to do with that. So I'm happy to talk more about the other many. There are many other exciting things we can talk about this book itself. But I want to talk a little bit about what the book allows, because when the Folger Shakespeare Library decided they were going to send a folio to every state in the country, the grant application was not simply, do you have a great museum that can house the book? Right, that's a low bar. The grant application, which was extremely detailed, and Susan Baraboo did a wonderful job of bringing it together, and Ed, you were in on this early in the conversations, and I was, and so many other people from across various disciplines said, we want events happening. We want to know that you're bringing people in. The Folger Shakespeare Library is a cultural institution. It's on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and it's the world's largest Shakespeare collection. Right? There's no larger Shakespeare collection, not even in England. The Folger is the world's largest. Yes, it's a research. It's a space for research. It's a space for going in. You have to have special access and sit in there. And I've had the good fortune to work with a number of First Folios, or the first printing of Shakespeare's sonnets. Last time I was there a couple months ago, I was working with a manuscript that we believe is in John Donne's hand. It's the epitaph that he wrote for his wife Anne. So there's a sort of amazing experience you can have inside these archives, but they also really see their role as going beyond those archives, doing public engagement. The Folger is a national leader in how Shakespeare's taught in kindergarten through 12th grade, and they're very much taking up the importance of that role of being an institution that is, yes, it's for researchers who are working with the rare books like I do, because we can't pull out John Donne's epitaph for his wife for just, you can't pass that around in a classroom. But there are things that they pass around. There are things that people can get their hands on. Mike Whitmore has been, I think, really a very important person in this process. I'm grateful that Mike is at the Folger for two reasons. One is that he's really made the Folger think outward, think about that. I think they were thinking it already, but he's done a very good job of helping them think about how they are an extension of the library, of the National Mall. At the end with the Folger Library, a place that people can come, an arts institution. But secondly, Mike left here to go there, which interestingly left a hole in the English department where they needed people to teach Shakespeare. And I'm really glad he left for that reason, because I like being here. So, as I'm saying, while the book itself is exciting, the book's visit has generated a lot of excitement and opportunities to collaborate and learn and think about Shakespeare on campus and in the community. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because what I know about your group, and I'm learning more today, I didn't know we were going to sing. I enjoyed it. I'm not sure everybody did, but what I know about your group is you're very active and interested in the community. And I think that I thought you might want to hear about some of these things. So, obviously we have the APT. Probably everybody's gone to an APT show. We have the APT, and sometimes maybe we take it for granted, but of course, on a yearly basis, we have a way of engaging with Shakespeare's plays and a lot of other plays in a really wonderful setting. I tell my students, talk about, it's so easy to hit a home run on a date if you take a date to the APT. This is how I get half my students to go. It's just, you're going to get all sorts of credit for planning. You don't even have to do much planning. You just show up to the Hill and everything's done for you. The other thing that we've had here as part of the APT, or connected with the APT, is Randall Duck-Kim and Ann Occhio-Grosso, two founders of the APT, who spent an amazing evening with us about a month ago. How many were there? I bet a number of you there. Yeah, it was a beautiful evening talking about their founding of the APT and all the work that went into it, but also they showed all these slides, images like this, and the whole audience, you could just hear them sort of viscerally reacting to remembering these. This is from 1986 when Randall Kim played Hamlet. So it's also inspired local productions to take up the Shakespearean theme. Romeo and Juliet, the University Opera at the Overture Center, and then just this past week, actually last night, was the last show of Verdi's Falstaff that David Ronis is directing at the University Theater, University Opera, and that was an absolutely terrific production. And I had, I think, probably about 25 different students from my two classes who went to see Falstaff, and it was not only their first time going to something like a big cultural event here, but it was their first time going to opera. And it's started a really good conversation for us. And I'm so happy that there are all these other events happening. Even over at the Chazen itself, there is the book, the First Folio. But what they've done is, instead of putting a lot of books around it or a lot of just information, they've done something really exciting over at the Chazen. Some of you have seen this already. They've brought in an exhibit called Presenting Shakespeare, posters from around the world. And it draws on the first ever curated collection of international Shakespeare theatrical posters. And we always have this idea, well, is Shakespeare meant to be read, or is it meant to be seen and heard? Yes, it is. The First Folio puts itself out there to be read, and somebody's got to read it and learn those lines to present it to you. But to be able to see it and hear it, to be able to see how people reinvent it, this poster exhibit is absolutely striking, and I think it couldn't be more different and more interesting in juxtaposition with the First Folio. So I hope you get a chance to see that. It's inspired other exhibits. If you really want to know more about the books, you could go up to Memorial Library to the 9th floor. The Globe, Global, and Shakespeare's Time is an extension of this First Folio. So you will have that experience of going in, and there is one book, and it's open at about 120 degrees, and you can see the to be or not to be speech. And it'll catch your eye, and you'll notice that it's printed differently, and it looks like it says to die, to fleet, perchance to dream, but it's just a long S. And you'll have this interaction with a different technology than you really are used to. However, there is, I sympathize. I feel it too. So this is and as somebody who loves Shakespeare and teaches it, there's like, okay, now what? How long do I stand in front of this book before so then you leave, and you may want to go to the Globe and Global. They have the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th folios. The folio did pretty well for itself. It was reprinted in 1632. We have one of those here. And I show it to students a lot. And then they also have the 3rd and 4th folios on loan from Milwaukee. So I wanted you to know a little bit about some of these things going on. But there's all these exhibits. I've been on this sort of like really sort of enjoyable lecture circuit. I've got to talk about all sorts of different things. I've been able to talk about Hamlet and popular culture, and about Aldo Leopold's land ethic, and about the hit musical Hamilton and how it draws on and imitates Shakespeare's history plays, about genomic and proteomic analysis of DNA evidence that we're gathering from parchment pages in our special collections library. I did that for the Wisconsin Science Festival. So the thing about making the year of Shakespeare in Wisconsin is everybody said, we come talk about Shakespeare everywhere, and it's been a lot of fun. But I have to say, the shows and talks are all great, and the book is great too. I promise. I'm not downplaying this First Folio, but those of you who are attending here, you know that you would go to some of those things anyway, wouldn't you? You would probably go to an opera if you had time. You would probably go see an exhibit like this. You probably go to the Chazen. You would probably do these things anyway. And that's good. But I think what's really exciting is how this exhibit is helping us get the next generation to think about media and technology and public engagement, to begin to think of themselves not as like these little groups of small groups doing their own little thing in college, but to think of themselves as minds in the world, that they're interacting with a diverse range of people and ideas. And in my last few minutes, I want to talk about that exciting part of this First Folio exhibit. I've had the opportunity with with one of my colleagues, Jonathan Senchen at School of Library and Information Sciences, to teach a course called Shakespeare and Media. It's a collaborative course. We got an educational innovation grant from the university to be able to put this together and co-teach a course. And in this course, we are working with students to help them think about not just, why are you reading Shakespeare now? What sort of things has to happen? How does Shakespeare become something you can read? How does this idea from the stage get onto a page and get passed through time? To ask them to think about their own media and the ways that they understand ideas in their own world, how they would share their own ideas. It's been exciting. We've taken them to a printing press, and they've been able to. One of them printed the Packers. They printed a prediction for the Packers score, and as it happens, it was like the one day they won this year. And so they had predicted it in print. Another one, it was really interesting. We're helping them think about the media and the message. Another one had they hand set the type that said, "Dear Mom, send money." And then he took a picture of it and he texted it to his mom. And his mom replied, "I just topped off your account." And and then this is this moment, the student with the handset printing, the cell phone, the smartphone, and the mother didn't get that the message wasn't the message, the medium was the message. She didn't notice that this was a hands, and so it opens up these great conversations about how we communicate, which I think are really important for students, not just for them to get their ideas out, but also to think about how does the medium, not just what you say, but how you say it and in what medium and in what way affects the message, affects how it's perceived. I'm going to end with the thing that's been most exciting for me. It's something I want you to know about. It's a program called Holding History. And I'm grateful my co-director for this program, Sarah Marty, is here. And she's spoken to you recently about the arts. Holding History is a program that's been supported by the library and really they've grown up in the special collections of the library. It's a program that is a mentoring program. We call it a mentoring-driven public engagement program. And exhibits like this folio exhibit, they give us a chance to draw in audiences. And what we do is sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been to a talk at the university where there are 3 people in the audience and you're one of them. Yeah. There is sometimes this model like if you build it, they will come. If I speak on the thing I know a lot about, people will just show up. And they don't, right? They don't. It's always hard predicting where the laughs are going to be in an audience. Yeah, okay, we hit a nerve there. Okay, good. They don't always think that. What happens is we're trying to think about how students can take in that Shakespeare and Media class, for instance, they have a project called the Shakes Constant Idea Project. It's their final project. Instead of writing a paper, their job is to have content, think of creatively. We have 3 C's: content, creativity, and contact. They have to have some content, Shakespeare content, think creatively about how to make contact with the broader community, with whatever they're learning about Shakespeare. The trick of that assignment is there's a narrative that's due at the end. And we expect a lot of those narratives to go basically something like, that fell on its head. That project fell on its head. It didn't quite work. We want them to be able to creatively fail, to make contact. We want them as first and second year students to realize that it's valid and it's valuable to take their knowledge and try to communicate it more broadly and to see how that works and have a conversation around it. And so that's what we're doing with, and that's really coming out of this program called Holding History, where we've been able to work with about 8 to 10 students who are in various classes have fallen in love with the special collections. Now, they're not going to be working with rare books. Like you, they might want to go see a rare book, but they're not going to be doing it for their life. Some of them are astrophysicists, some are astrophysics majors, some of them are biology majors, pre-med majors. They're wonderful students who are coming from a range of different areas. But what they're doing is they realize the value of being brought into a mentoring program where we set up the room in the special collections with these 16th and 17th century books. They're set up around tables, science fair style. And instead of me saying, hey, come look at this book, and you thinking I'm going to touch it the wrong way, I'm going to mess it up, you get to just go up to the students, and the students show you this book, and they talk through it. They spend a month preparing their talks. And I work with them in special collections, and Sarah Marty works with them in terms of their presentation, thinking about clothing as costuming, right? It's not, when you're doing a public presentation, thinking about how you present yourself. And so we're really working with them to help them know that they are minds in the world, not just invisible members. They can't just hide out on the university, but they have to think of themselves as how are they taking their ideas and making something better in the world. It's a great program, and I'm just going to flip through images as I wrap up. I've promised that I'll be done by 1:20, but we're going to end well ahead of 1:20, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. But this is just part of the program. These people coming in and gathering around the books. We did a wonderful event with the Odyssey Project. Something that came out of that was the sense of legacy. Students who were saying, I see this book that's being read 400 years later, and it makes me want to go home and finish my memoir. Isn't that amazing? Because you realize the power of words, the power of putting something on a page to mark your legacy, to be able to pass your name and your ideas forward. And that's what we really are thinking all about with this program and with the First Folio. It's this question, if I have a great idea, if you have a great idea, if Galileo has a great idea, if Shakespeare has a great idea, how do I take that idea? How do I hold it in my hands? And how do I share it with others? The First Folio is an example of how you might do that. But you're thinking about that now with your ideas, and the next generation is thinking about it with their ideas. Sometimes with media we don't understand, but it's still the same question. How do I hold it in my hands? And how do I share it with others? So what's so exciting about the First Folio? It's just a book. But it opens up so many other conversations about books, about media, about music, about the arts, and about all those things that make us feel human. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to going to the presentation tomorrow. And of course, we should acknowledge Shakespeare was the Bob Dylan of the 17th century. My question is, the tragedy of Macbeth and Antony and Cleopatra can both be read as having very sharp criticism of King James in the aftermath of the gunpowder plot. Mm-hmm. Did that have anything to do with their not being published prior to the First Folio?
That's a good question. Way to throw a softball out first. Yes, you're right. So these are both, there is a question of some things that have not been printed. Is the reason that they're printed because they're controversial in some way? The same could be said, it's true of the prologue, of the chorus for Henry V, which talks about the Essex Rebellion and is not in the first printing, in the Court of Printing. I would say the simple answer is yes, a lot of scholars do believe that there is, that there may have been a certain risk in a printer publishing something that might have been related to the gunpowder plot. Of course, what you know about the gunpowder plot, if you know anything, is remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot, and these anonymous masks that now carry that forward. But it was a plot that happened in 1605 and certainly was being referenced in Macbeth. So yes, it has. There definitely are some political reasons why those may not have been printed in a smaller edition first.
This is my third time I've heard you give this presentation, and each time is just beautiful. But one of the things that you've talked about before is the process of getting them in print, and how many different hands are involved in that. And I was wondering if you could address that.
Absolutely, yeah. You're the person I've been worried about. I think I've done something like, I was trying to do a tally where I've talked about Shakespeare in 6 states and 3 countries in the last year. Here in Wisconsin, the Folio opened less than 2 weeks ago. I've done 6 talks and a radio interview, and I'm afraid that some people are just getting overlap. The process that's involved in it is you start with a really for the play. Shakespeare would have written a script. He would have folded up his page, and he would have had different. All the different parts. But once you get the different parts, once you sort of have an approval from the company, then you're going to write each person's part on a roll or a scroll. And each person's going to have only their part. So you notice in Midsummer Night's Dream, there'll be the example of people not following their cues. Well, you don't have everybody else's lines. You just have what your cue is what the person says before you come in. And so each person would have had their role. Now, after that point, then the question is, what happens to those original papers, those handwritten copies, if they're not going to write up what they call a fair copy and take it to a printer to be printed right away, like something like Henry IV Part 1 would have been, then what happens to what they call the foul papers, the first draft, right? What do you do with your drafts? And so eventually, you have printers who are vying. By 1623, Shakespeare. Let me back up. Shakespeare's first plays were printed and his first poems were printed. His name didn't appear on the title page. Right? He was not known. He was not yet the Bob Dylan. But now, if you put Bob Dylan on something, you will sell it, right? And so it's the same thing you see. By the time we get to 1623, it's very clear that Shakespeare's a selling point. That big head, right? And the Shakespeare in very large print. And so by this point, they're vying for Shakespeare's plays. They're putting them together. Sometimes there's the various actors, Hemming and Condell, who printed the First Folio or put it together. They were two actors in Shakespeare's company. So sometimes they're working, they would have known what a good script is. In some cases, it's believed they're working sometimes from memory. But these are eventually they put it all together and in a draft, which then goes to the printing house. Each letter is picked out individually from a typecase and set and printed. And they print about 750. For what it's worth, about almost 250 survive. You'll see at the First Folio exhibit, it says 233. That number is already outdated. It's certainly 235, and we think we'll have another. We'll be able to verify another one within the month. 236. Probably there are 250 when you add private collectors. So this is not a rare book by any standard. If 1/3 of them survive from 1623, but it's a book it was very carefully made. A lot of hands involved. There were a lot of compositors. There were probably 5 compositors who were putting it together. That means that they were 5 different people who were putting putting the type together to print it. They spell things differently, and this is how we begin to have a sense of who was setting the type. And there's one compositor who everybody thinks is always drunk. Compositor E, yeah. Compositor B was the one you really wanted setting types. There's all these theories we develop around it because there are, as you say, so many hands involved in the process, and so it's really a monumental work, and they make it very clear it's a monumental work. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I have a question from you. For the 73 years that I have lived in the United States, I ask this question often. And that is this, that certainly Shakespeare is one of the very greatest, and I admire him very much. But the question is this, and even from the person who was teaching Shakespeare here, people were working in a committee years ago at the university, and that I have heard that Shakespeare got the idea about Romeo and Juliet from Nizami, the famous Persian on Layli and Majnun. And he said, yes, he has heard that a number of times too. However, they have never found any evidence of that. So I was wondering whether you know anything about this or not. Because Nizami, Layli and Majnun, Nizami wrote 5 things, and that was one of them. And everybody admired him. And of course, being a Persian, Persia probably one of the greatest country in the world in poetry for upward 2,000-3,000 years ago. Yeah. So what is your opinion about that?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and one I wish that we could be back at the Scotch night you had. This is a good over Scotch. First of all, the Persian influence on Shakespeare has to first be recognized in the folio. What they call the folio is referring to a size of paper. Paper making spreads from the east, and it spreads through the Arab culture in the time of the Crusades has preserved both the traditional arts of paper making, but also a lot of the medical treatises that then become part of the European and English the medical ideas come from that sort of preserved there, and also Aristotle. We really wouldn't have had Aristotle nearly as completely if not for the Persian culture that is preserving so much of that. Now, the exact reference where Romeo and Juliet, what Shakespeare's borrowing from, we don't have direct evidence to say, yes, this is definitely where he got this. But what we do know about Shakespeare, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about with students, is that Shakespeare is he's a voracious reader and a voracious borrower. Shakespeare does not invent plots, almost ever. He wrote a play called Hamlet, and there had recently been a play called Hamlet that had been performed on the stage. He wrote a play called King Lear. He wrote a play called King Lear in 1606. Guess what was printed in 1605? A play called King Lear. It was L-E-I-R, though, so it doesn't count. Right? I mean, you can imagine the sort of like student trying to excuse a plagiarism. We see him borrowing direct lines out of Plutarch, out of Holinshed's Chronicles. He's actively borrowing. It's the culture of reading, and then writing from your reading. Whether it's a false etymology or not, some people argue it is, invention, they imagined coming not from an angel coming to you on a mountain, but from an inventory. Invention comes from an inventory. You store up ideas by reading other people. And we know Shakespeare is a voracious reader. It would not surprise me if at some point he did get his hands on some other source stories that we can't. The issue there is the one way that we know exactly where he borrowed is because of exact language, and there's not that exactitude of language between the translation and Shakespeare's version. But I think the story would have passed along, and he's a brilliant. He's brilliant at taking a story and turning it into something better. He finds the place to turn it into something better. All right, this is the last question. Great.
I was wondering, I've heard of Shakespeare. I haven't heard of a lot of his contemporaries or his competitors, his peers. Did they get folios written or printed too? Or is Shakespeare really the rock star of that age?
Yes and no. Ben Jonson thinks he's the rock star. Ben Jonson does publish a folio in 1616. He supervises it. He's the person who hangs around the printing press until they kick him out because they say, just let us do our job. Shakespeare didn't seem as worried about having his stuff printed. But certainly there are a lot of other playwrights, and this is a great question to end on because one of the things that I hope that I try to do with Shakespeare is to say, look, this is not about just reading Shakespeare. It's about what Shakespeare represents as a reader and thinking about other readers of Shakespeare, how they worked with him, other writers around Shakespeare. Sometimes we get really focused on just one writer, and I think that the invitation is to come in and say, yeah, actually there's John Fletcher that he wrote with. Shakespeare wrote with other people. And the Oxford University Press is going to be soon printing a book. They're claiming that he wrote Henry VI with Christopher Marlowe. They're going to be printing it that way. I think it's a little bit of a publicity stunt. I think it's too early to say that exactly, but they're also saying he collaborated on Arden of Faversham, the play Arden of Faversham, which is sort of the early modern CSI play. And so there are a lot of collaborators, and what I think the attention to Shakespeare does is allows us to say, not like don't walk through this door and stop at Shakespeare, but walk through this door, look at Shakespeare, and then look out. I mean, the other readers of Shakespeare are equally exciting. And one of my favorite things to teach is James Baldwin's essay called "Why I Stopped Hating Shakespeare," and helping students to see how people from other ways of thinking, other times in life, other periods, are approaching this and saying, okay, I see now what he's doing. I can take that thing that matters to me, and I can make my own art. I can make my own music. I can draw from this and create something new, and I can put my voice in the world. And so I think I appreciate the reference to others.
Thank you so much, Josh. I wish you a wonderful week next week of blessings and thanksgivings, and we will see you back in a couple weeks. And President-elect Donna Hurd will be leading us at the podium. So mark your calendars for that. This meeting's adjourned.